The Dakota Territory, 1867, a time when the frontier demanded youth and vigor from all who dared to settle it. But for Martha Blackwood, a woman of 48 years, her greatest crime wasn't the homestead she had built with her own hands. It was the gray in her hair and the lines on her face. Cast out into the merciless winter by her own family, she was left to die in the frozen wasteland. They called her too old, a burden, useless. But the Lakota people who found her half buried in snow saw something else entirely: wisdom, strength, and a spirit that refused to break. And among them was a warrior named Silent Fox, whose own story of loss would intertwine with hers in ways neither could have imagined. This is the remarkable true story of how fate brought together two souls from different worlds, and how love flourished where hatred had sought to destroy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old grandfather clock in the corner of the cabin struck 3, its somber chime barely audible over the howling wind that assaulted the homestead. Martha Blackwood wrapped her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, her fingers stiff with cold despite the fire that struggled to stay alive in the hearth. The flames cast long dancing shadows across the rough-hewn floor, illuminating the faces of those who had gathered. Faces that once held love, but now bore only contempt. "You can't possibly expect us to keep her through another winter." Her nephew, Richard Blackwood, spoke as if she weren't sitting right there, as if she were already a ghost. At 35, he had inherited his father's height and broad shoulders, but none of his compassion. "Look at her. She can barely tend the fire, let alone help with the spring planting." Martha's gaze remained fixed on the flames, her back straight. Despite the ache that had settled deep in her bones, pride was all she had left now. "Richard, please," his wife Eleanor whispered, though her plea lacked conviction. The woman kept her eyes downcast, fingers nervously pleating and unpleating the fabric of her skirt. "No, I've made up my mind. My father may have felt obligated to take in his spinster sister, but that obligation died with him." Richard's voice hardened. "We barely have enough to feed our own children. We can't afford another mouth that contributes nothing." Martha finally looked up, her grey eyes clear and steady. "I've never asked for charity, Richard. This land was my father's," he cut her off. "And now it's mine. Every acre, every timber, every nail in these walls belongs to me now." The truth hung between them, ugly and undeniable. Her brother Joseph had promised her a home for life when she came west, after their parents died. But Joseph was 3 months in the grave now, and promises, it seemed, didn't survive their makers. Outside, the February storm intensified, rattling the windows in their frames like angry spirits demanding entry. The Dakota Territory was unforgiving in winter, a fact Martha knew all too well after 15 years on the frontier. She had survived droughts, blizzards, and raids. She had helped birth every one of Richard's 5 children. She had nursed Joseph through his final illness while Richard was away trading in Bismarck. None of that mattered now. "I've packed your things," Richard said, nodding toward a small bundle by the door. "There's food for 3 days, your mother's. A Bible and father's old hunting knife." Martha's heart stuttered in her chest. "You're putting me out? Now? In this storm?" "The stage to Fort Abercrombie passes tomorrow morning. 10 miles down the post road. You can shelter in the Williams' abandoned barn tonight." 10 miles in this weather would kill a man half my age," Martha said, her voice steady despite the terror blooming in her chest. Richard's wife let out a small sound, something between a whimper and a protest, but one stern look from her husband silenced her. "That's not my concern," Richard replied coldly. "I've made my decision. You leave today." Martha's gaze swept the room. The cabin she had helped build, the rocking chair she had brought all the way from Pennsylvania, the quilt on the children's bed that she had stitched by hand during the endless winter nights. 15 years of her life contained within these walls, and now she was being cast out like unwanted refuse. In the corner, little Sarah, just 8 years old, watched with wide, tearful eyes. The child slipped from her seat and ran to Martha, throwing thin arms around. "Oh, waste. Aunt Martha can't stay sick," she sobbed. "She makes the best medicine. Remember when I had the fever? She made me better." Richard pried his daughter's arms away. "Your mother can learn to make medicine. Go to your room now." "The children still need me," Martha said softly, her hand reaching for Sarah's small shoulder. "We'll manage," Richard said, his tone final. "The new settlement needs experienced women. Maybe they'll take you in, or maybe the mission at Standing Rock." His expression made it clear he believed neither would want her. Martha stood slowly, gathering her dignity around her like armor. She had known this day might come. Joseph had warned her in his final hours, his voice weak but urgent. "Richard has changed. The land has made him hard. He sees only what things are worth, not their true value." How right her brother had been. "I'll need my sewing kit," she said, "and my herbs. If I'm to survive, I'll need those at least." Richard hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Take what you can carry, nothing more." Within the hour, Martha stood on the porch, a canvas pack slung over her shoulder, her brother's old walking stick in her hand. The wind cut through her woolen coat like knives, stealing her breath. Snow had already begun to accumulate, dusting the prairie in white. In the distance, the black hills were invisible behind a wall of swirling grey. Eleanor pressed a small pouch of dried apples into her hand, her eyes never meeting Martha's. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Martha looked past her to the cabin window, where small faces peered out, her nieces and nephews watching with solemn eyes as their father forced their aunt into the wilderness. She raised her hand in a final farewell, then turned toward the road. Pride kept her back straight until she was certain they could no longer see her. Only then did her shoulders slump. Only then did the tears come, freezing almost instantly on her weathered cheeks. 10 miles to the post. Road. 10 miles through knee-deep snow with night approaching. Martha knew what Richard was doing, offering the illusion of mercy while delivering a death sentence. No one survived alone in a Dakota winter. The first hour was the easiest. Anger fueled her steps, driving her forward despite the wind that fought her with every stride. The second hour brought numbness to her toes and fingers. By the third hour, the sun was setting, painting the endless white landscape in shades of pink and gold that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Martha knew she wouldn't make it to the Williams barn. The landmarks she had, known for years, had vanished beneath the snow, and the growing darkness made navigation nearly impossible. She needed shelter, and soon. In the gathering gloom, she spotted a stand of cottonwoods along what she believed was Crooked Creek. Trees meant some protection from the wind, possibly fallen logs to build a windbreak. It wasn't much, but it was her only chance. The descent to the creek bed was treacherous. Twice she fell, the second time tumbling several yards down the embankment, losing her walking stick and bruising her hip badly. The pain brought fresh tears, but Martha forced herself to keep moving. To stop was to die. Among the trees, the wind's howl diminished slightly. Martha clawed through the snow until she found the creek bank, following it until she discovered what she'd been searching for, a slight overhang where the water had eroded the earth beneath, a massive tangle of cottonwood roots. It wasn't a cave, barely a hollow, but it would shield her from the worst of the storm. With trembling hands, she unpacked her meager supplies, the flint and steel her brother had given her years ago, a small tin of precious tinder, the hunting knife. She gathered what dry branches she could find beneath the snow, arranging them in the deepest part of her shelter. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she wasn't certain. Her fingers, now numb and clumsy, struck the flint against steel once, twice, a dozen times before a spark finally caught. She nursed the tiny flame with her breath, adding the smallest twigs until a fire, pitifully small but real, flickered to life. Martha huddled close to the flames, knowing the fire was too small to last the night, knowing that even if she survived, until morning, she had nowhere to go. The stage to Fort Abercrombie might as well have been on the moon. As darkness claimed the land, Martha's thoughts turned to her life. She had never married, choosing instead to care for her aging parents in Philadelphia until their passing. By then, she was already past the age most considered marriageable. When Joseph invited her west, it had seemed like a grand adventure, a chance to be useful again. And she had been useful. She had become the unofficial midwife for 3 settlements, had learned which plants could heal and which could harm, had taught the children their letters when no proper school existed. She had earned her place in this harsh land through sweat and determination. Now, at 48, she was too old, a burden, disposable. The fire began to sputter as the small supply of dry wood dwindled. Martha forced herself to move, to search, for more fuel, but her limbs responded sluggishly. Cold had seeped into her core, and a dangerous drowsiness pulled at her. "Not yet," she murmured, fighting to stay awake. "Not like this." The wind shifted suddenly, driving snow directly into her shelter, nearly extinguishing her precious fire. Martha turned her back to the gust, shielding the flames with her body. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm, hoofbeats. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks, conjuring hope where none existed, but the rhythm grew louder, more distinct. Someone was approaching. Martha struggled to her feet, stumbling toward the edge of her shelter. "Here," she called, her voice thin against the storm's fury. "I'm here." For a terrifying moment she thought they had passed by, that her cries had gone unheard. Then dark shapes materialized from the swirling snow, horses, 5 or 6 of them, and riders wrapped in thick furs. The lead rider dismounted, moving toward her with careful steps. In the dying light of her fire, Martha could make out features that belonged to no settler. High cheekbones, dark eyes, long black hair plaited with small decorative beads. Lakota. Martha's breath caught in her throat. The tribes in this region had maintained an uneasy peace with the settlers for the past few years, but stories of violence on both sides were common. She had treated Lakota patients occasionally when they sought her help, but always under the protective roof of her brothers. Homestead, here alone in the wilderness, she was utterly vulnerable. The warrior studied her, his expression unreadable. He spoke words she didn't understand, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. When she didn't respond, he tried again, this time in halting English. "Why a woman alone? Storm is coming. Death comes." Martha swallowed hard, her mouth dry with fear and cold. "My family, son. They sent me away. I have nowhere to go." The warrior frowned, clearly struggling to comprehend. He turned, speaking rapidly to his companions. There was a brief discussion, voices rising and falling like the wind itself. Martha sank back against the embankment, her strength failing. The cold had worked its way so deeply into her bones that she could no longer feel her feet or hands. The drowsiness returned, stronger now, whispering seductive promises of warmth. If only she would close her eyes. She was vaguely aware of strong arms lifting her, of being wrapped in something soft and warm, of the sensation of movement. But these impressions came as if through a fog, dreamlike and distant. The last thing Martha Blackwood remembered before consciousness slipped away was the warrior's face above hers, his dark eyes filled with something she hadn't seen in a very long time: concern. The world went dark, and Martha surrendered to it, certain she would never wake again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. When awareness returned, it came in fragments, the crackling of a fire much larger than her own had been. The scent of something rich and savory cooking, soft voices speaking in a language she didn't understand, the weight of fur blankets pressed against her skin. Martha's eyelids fluttered open, her vision blurry at first. She was inside a lodge, of some kind, a teepee, its walls rising to a smoke hole at the top where snowflakes occasionally drifted in, only to vanish before they reached the fire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "She wakes," a woman's voice said in accented English. Martha turned her head slowly, wincing at the pain that shot through her temples. An older Lakota woman knelt beside her, her long grey hair bound in 2 braids, her face lined with the wisdom of years. She held a wooden cup in gnarled hands. "Drink," the woman commanded, pressing the cup to Martha's lips. "Medicine is good, make it strong." The liquid was bitter, with undertones of mint and something earthier. Martha swallowed obediently, too weak to refuse. "Where am I?" she asked when she had finished. "Winter camp of Hunkpapa Lakota," the woman replied, "near what white man calls Black Snake River." Martha struggled to orient herself. Black Snake River was at least 20 miles from her brother's homestead. Had she traveled so far in her delirium? "How long have I been here?" "2 suns," the woman answered, adjusting the fur blankets around Martha's shoulders. "Fever came, fever went, you live." She said this matter-of-factly, as if Martha's survival had never been in question. "The warrior who found me, Setan in Yankee." The woman nodded. "Running hawk in your tongue, my son, he brings you here." Martha closed her eyes, overwhelmed. These people, strangers, had saved her life while her own flesh and blood had condemned her to death. The irony was not lost on her. "Rest now," the old woman said, rising with surprising grace for one of her years. "Tomorrow you talk with him." As the woman moved away, Martha caught a glimpse of her face in the firelight, the deep lines around her eyes, the silver threading through her dark braids. She was old, perhaps older than Martha herself, yet here she moved with purpose and authority. No one had cast her out for being too old. Sleep reclaimed Martha then, but it was different this time. Healing rather than dangerous, warm rather than cold. And for the first time since Richard had uttered those terrible words, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps her story wasn't ending after all. Perhaps it was just beginning. The following days passed in a haze for Martha. Her body, pushed beyond its limits by cold and exhaustion, demanded rest. She drifted in and out of consciousness, tended by the old woman who introduced herself as Wichapi, Star. Each time Martha woke, Wichapi was there with herbal tea, rich bone broth, or a paste of crushed roots to apply to her frostbitten extremities. It was on the 4th day that Martha finally managed to sit up, her strength returning in small increments. The teepee was empty except for Wichapi, who sat across the fire grinding herbs with a stone mortar and pestle. "You have healer's hands," Wichapi observed without looking up, somehow sensing Martha's wakeful state. "I watched you prepare medicines. In your sleep." Martha glanced down at her hands, weathered, calloused, the nails trimmed short for practicality. "I was a midwife back east. When I came west, there were no doctors. I learned what I could from books, from the women in neighboring homesteads from watching." Wichapi nodded, as if this confirmed something she already knew. The plants speak to some, not all hear their voices. Martha had never thought of her knowledge in such terms, but she found herself nodding. There had been times when she'd been drawn to a particular herb, a specific route, guided by some instinct she couldn't articulate. "Your son," Martha said, changing the subject. "I need to thank him." "He comes soon," Wichapi replied, adding water to her ground herbs. Many questions he has. Why white woman alone in the snow? Why is no family protected? The reminder of Richard's betrayal sent a fresh wave of pain through Martha that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. How could she explain to these people the cruelty of her own blood? She didn't have to wait long for the opportunity. The tippy flap opened, admitting a gust of cold air and the warrior who had found her. Running Hawk was tall, his shoulders broad beneath a fur-lined vest. His face, Martha now saw in full light, bore the scars of battles fought and survived, a thin line that crossed his left cheek, another that curved along his jaw. He wasn't young, perhaps in his late 40s, and carried himself with the quiet authority of one accustomed to being heard. "You heal," he said in English, his voice deeper than she remembered, his tone somewhere between statement and question. "Thanks to your mother's care," Martha replied, inclining her head toward Wichapi, "and to you for finding me. I owe you my life." Running Hawk settled on a buffalo robe near the fire, his movements deliberate, unhurried. "Why are you alone?" "Storm time is dangerous. Death time." The blunt question demanded an equally direct answer. Martha took a deep breath, steeling herself against the shame that threatened to overwhelm her. "My brother died 3 moons ago," she began, using terms she thought would be clear to him. "His son, my nephew, took his land, his home. He said I was too old, that I ate food but gave nothing back." Her voice threatened to break, but she forced herself to continue. "He put me out, told me to walk to the next settlement. He knew I would die." Running Hawk's expression darkened as he translated her words for his mother. Wichapi's reaction was immediate and vocal, a stream of what Martha assumed were curses in Lakota. "This thing is not done," Running Hawk said when his mother had finished. "Old ones hold wisdom, hold stories, hold life. It's different for white settlers," Martha said quietly. "When you can't work the land, when you can't bear children, when you grow old." She trailed off, the brutal truth hanging in the air between them. "Your medicine, no value?" Running Hawk asked, genuinely confused. "To some, yes. But not to Richard. He saw only another mouth to feed through winter." Running Hawk was silent, for a long moment processing her words. "This nephew, he has children," Martha nodded. 5. "Who teaches them? Who shows path when mother is busy? Who holds stories of family?" "I did," Martha whispered, "until I didn't." Running Hawk exchanged glances with his mother, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, he turned back to Martha. "You rest. Grow strong. Council meets soon. Decide." With that cryptic statement, he rose and left the teepee, leaving Martha with 1,000 unasked questions. She looked to Wichapi, hoping for clarification. The old woman smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "My son," big heart under warrior face. "Now eat." She pushed a wooden bowl of stew toward Martha. "Stories come with strength." Over the next few days, as Martha's body healed, she began to learn more about the people who had saved her. Wichapi, sensing her curiosity, shared stories of their camp, their customs, their history. Martha learned that Running Hawk was a respected warrior and council member, a voice of moderation in times of conflict with white settlers. She learned that Wichapi was the camp's most knowledgeable healer, her skills sought by neighboring bands and even occasionally desperate settlers when their own remedies failed. What Wichapi didn't share, at least not directly, was anything about Running Hawk's personal life. It was from casual comments, from the absence of certain questions, that Martha began to piece together the truth. Running Hawk had no wife, no children of his own. Whether this was by choice or circumstance, Martha couldn't tell, and she didn't feel it was her place to ask. It was on her 7th day in the camp that Running Hawk returned to the teepee, as Martha sat grinding herbs under Wichapi's watchful eye. The old woman had been teaching her the Lakota names for plants Martha already knew, and introducing her to others she had never encountered. "Walk with me," Running Hawk said without preamble. It wasn't quite a command, but neither was it a request. That invited refusal. Martha glanced at Wichapi, who nodded encouragingly. Go. Sun medicine is good for healing. Outside, the winter camp sprawled before her, dozens of teepees arranged in a great circle, smoke rising from their peaks into a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. Snow still blanketed the ground, but paths had been worn between dwellings, packed hard by countless feet. Children played, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. Women worked at outdoor tasks, scraping hides or smoking meat on racks. Men gathered in small groups, some repairing weapons, others engaged in what appeared to be serious discussions. Life. Vibrant, purposeful life, even in the depths of winter. Running Hawk led her through the camp, occasionally nodding to those they passed. Martha felt eyes on her, curious, assessing, some friendly, others wary. She was, after all, a white woman in a place few whites had ever been welcome. "Council spoke of you," Running Hawk said as they reached the edge of the camp. He gestured toward a fallen log, brushing snow from it so she could sit. Many words. Martha lowered herself onto the makeshift seat, her legs still weak from her ordeal. What did they decide? Running Hawk remained standing, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "Some say, send you to White Fort when the snow melts. Some say you bring trouble, soldiers follow women who disappear." He turned to look at her directly. "I say you stay, learn, teach." Martha's breath caught. "Stay here, but I'm white," he finished for her. "Yes, but other things too, healer, teacher." He paused, something softening in his expression. "Woman with no place." The simple truth of his words struck Martha with unexpected force. She was indeed a woman with no place, not in her nephew's home, not in the white settlements where an unmarried woman of her age would forever be dependent on charity. "Why would you want me to stay?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I'm a stranger. I'm old." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been amusement. "My mother is older, still valued, still needed." He gestured toward the camp. "Children need a teacher of white ways, need to know words, numbers, need to understand the enemy to survive." Enemy. The word hung between them, a reminder of this larger forces at work beyond this moment, beyond this unexpected connection. "And if I wanted to leave?" Martha asked, though she was surprised to discover the question was entirely hypothetical. The thought of returning to the world that had cast her out held no appeal. "Then you leave when it passes clear," Running Hawk said simply. "No prisoner." Martha looked back at the camp, at the life unfolding there. What did she have to return to? A society that valued youth above experience, beauty above wisdom, towns where a woman alone was always vulnerable. Where would she go? What would she do? "I would like to stay," she said finally. "At least until spring. I can teach the children, help your mother with healing." Running Hawk nodded once, as if he had expected no other answer. "Good. Now I will tell you my story, so you understand." He lowered himself to the log beside her, his eyes fixed on the horizon as he began to speak. His English, though accented, was more fluent than she had initially realized. 15 winters ago I had a wife, and Petui Sunday, beautiful, strong, carried our child. His voice remained steady, but Martha could hear the undercurrent of old pain. "White soldiers came to the village on the Powder River. Not our camp. We are visiting her family." Martha's stomach tightened. She had heard whispers of such attacks, sanitized accounts in newspapers that spoke of hostile savages and necessary action. "They killed all, men, women, children." Running Hawk's hands clenched. "I went hunting, returned to find—" He shook his head, unable or unwilling to describe what he had found. "My wife, my unborn child." Her family, all gone. "I'm so sorry," Martha whispered, the words wholly inadequate for such loss. Many warriors wanted war then, wanted blood for blood. He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "I wanted to, hated all whites, dreamed of killing." He tapped his chest. "But hate is poison, kills inside first." "What changed?" Martha asked softly. "Old chief, wiser than me, said, 'One hand cannot cover the sun.' Meant white men too many. War means death for all Lakota." Running Hawk's expression was complex. Resignation, determination, a deep sorrow. "So I learned their language, learned their ways, became voice. Between worlds, the weight of his past hung in the air between them." Martha understood now why he had been the one to argue for her to stay. He had found a way past hatred, past the easy assumption that all whites were enemies. "Now you understand," he said. "Why do some in camp look at you with cold eyes? Why do others accept?" Martha nodded slowly. "And you? How do you see me?" Running Hawk was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I see a woman, strong like river stone that water cannot break. I see healers with knowledge my people need. I see—" He hesitated. "I see someone like me, between worlds, not fully belonging anywhere." His insight struck Martha with the force of revelation. He was right. She had never fully belonged, not in proper Philadelphia society as a spinster caring for aging parents, not on the frontier where her skills were valued, but her age eventually became her downfall. "Thank you for telling me your story," she said, "for trusting me with it." Running Hawk nodded once, then rose. "Now we go back. My mother worries." As they walked back through camp, Martha saw it with new eyes. Not just as a temporary refuge, but as a place where she might find purpose again. A place where age was respected rather than despised. That evening, as she sat with Wichapi sorting dried plants, Martha found herself thinking of Richard and his family. By now, they would have assumed her dead, another victim of the merciless Dakota winter. There would have been no search, no inquiry. Perhaps a brief prayer at Sunday service, more for appearances than genuine grief. "Your thoughts wander," Wichapi observed, her gnarled fingers deftly separating leaves from stems. "I was thinking of my family," Martha admitted. "They believe me dead by now." Wichapi made a soft sound that might have been a dismissal. "Those who cast out kin in winter have no right to grieve." "No," Martha agreed. "But there are children, my nieces and nephews. They didn't understand." "Children learn what parents teach," Wichapi said, her voice hardening slightly. "Your nephew teaches that old ones have no value, that family bonds break when convenient." She shook her head. "Bad medicine, poison many generations." Martha couldn't argue with the truth of those words. What lesson had Richard taught his children by casting her out? That people were disposable once their usefulness ended? That family bonds were conditional? "In our way," Wichapi continued, "elders are most treasured. They carry stories, knowledge, wisdom of many winters. When young ones forget this, the whole tribe weakens." "It wasn't always like this among my people either," Martha said softly. "Once families stayed together, grandparents helped raise children, taught skills, shared wisdom. But the frontier—" She sighed. "Life is harder here, resources scarcer." "Scarcity is an excuse," Wichapi said firmly. "No reason. Heart either values life or it does not." The blunt assessment struck Martha as profoundly true. Richard's actions hadn't been about scarcity, they had been about value. He had simply decided she wasn't worth the resources required to keep her alive. "My son values life," Wichapi said, changing the subject with the abruptness Martha had come to expect from her. "Even after a great loss, even when hating would be easier. He told me about his wife," Martha said. "It's a terrible tragedy." Wichapi nodded, her eyes distant with remembered sorrow. "Many moons he walked in darkness, spoke to no one, hunted, alone, fought recklessly, as if seeking death. She looked directly at Martha. But a good heart cannot stay buried forever. Like seed in winter, seems dead, but life waits inside. Martha thought about the man she had met, strong, purposeful, somehow managing to bridge two worlds that seemed determined to remain in conflict. It was difficult to imagine him consumed by hatred and grief. "He sees something in you," Wichapi said, her tone casual, though her words were anything but. "Something that calls to his spirit." Heat rose to Martha's cheeks. I'm sure you're mistaken. He pities me, perhaps, sees someone who needs help, as he once did." Wichapi smiled, the expression knowing and slightly mischievous. "I have many. Winters, my eyes see a lot." She returned to her sorting, apparently satisfied with having planted the seed of an idea she had no intention of elaborating on. Martha busied herself with the herbs, trying to ignore the flutter of something unfamiliar in her chest. It was absurd to think that Running Hawk might see her as anything other than a responsibility, a problem the council had entrusted to him. She was 48, grey-haired, a white woman in a Lakota camp, and he was... She cut the thought short, unwilling to follow where it led. The next morning, Martha began her new role as teacher. A small teepee had been designated as the schoolhouse, furnished with buffalo robes for seating and a flat piece of bark that would serve as a writing surface. Running Hawk brought her 10 children ranging in age from about 6 to 14, introducing her simply as Teacher Martha. "They know some English," he explained. "Others in camp speak Lakota only. Children bridge worlds." Martha looked at the solemn young faces watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. These children had likely heard stories about white settlers from the time they could understand words. How many had lost family members to soldiers, to disease brought by whites, to the encroachment on their hunting grounds. "Thank you for coming," she said, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I'm here to teach you more English and numbers and whatever else you want to learn." A girl of about 12, her dark hair plaited in 2 neat braids, raised her hand. "Why do you want to teach us? White people hate Indians." The directness of the question took Martha aback, but she recognized its importance. These children deserve honesty. "Some white people hate what they don't understand," she said carefully. "Some are afraid. Some believe lies they've been told." She met the girl's gaze steadily. "But not all. I don't hate you. I'm grateful to your people for saving my life when my own family cast me out." "Why do they do that?" asked a small boy, no more than 7. Martha hesitated, unsure how to explain the complexities of settler society to children. "They thought I was too old to be useful. In your culture, elders are respected for their wisdom. In mine, sometimes. People are valued only for what work they can do." The children exchanged glances, clearly finding this concept disturbing. "That's stupid," declared a boy of about 14, the oldest in the group. A surprised laugh escaped Martha. "Yes, it is. Rather stupid, isn't it?" The tension broke. Several children giggled, and Martha felt something ease in her chest. This might work after all. "Now," she said, "let's begin with names. I'm Martha Blackwood. Who would like to tell me their name first?" As the children took turns introducing themselves, first in Lakota, then in their best English, Martha felt a presence at the tipi entrance. Running Hawk stood there, watching with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, of a shared purpose. Then he was gone, leaving Martha to wonder at the strange path that had led her here to this moment, teaching English to Lakota children in the heart of winter. Life, it seemed, had not finished with her after all. The weeks slipped by with surprising swiftness. February yielded to March, And while winter still held the prairie in its grip, there were subtle signs of the coming spring. Longer days, the occasional brave bird returning early from southern migrations, a quality to the sunlight that hinted at warmth to come. Martha's days fell into a rhythm that brought unexpected contentment. Mornings were devoted to teaching the children, who proved to be quick learners and increasingly eager students. Their initial wariness had given way to curiosity, then to genuine engagement. They bombarded her with questions not just about language and numbers, but about the world beyond their experience. Towering buildings in eastern cities, ships that crossed vast oceans, machines that could harvest fields of grain. Afternoons found her working alongside Wichapi, deepening her knowledge of Lakota healing practices while sharing her own. The exchange was remarkably equitable. For every technique Martha demonstrated, Wichapi taught her something in return. Together they treated winter ailments, prepared for spring births, and created salves for the inevitable injuries that came with daily life. Evenings were for community, meals shared around fires, stories told in the mixture of English and Lakota that Martha was gradually learning to understand. She would never be fluent, she knew, but she could now catch the drift of conversations, recognize names and common phrases. Running Hawk was a constant, if sometimes distant, presence in her new life. He checked on her progress with the children, occasionally sitting at the back of the teaching tipi, listening with an intensity that both unsettled and pleased her. He brought her special items for her lessons, a bundle of sticks perfect for counting exercises, a piece of slate that could be written on with charcoal, and once, to her astonishment, 3 battered books salvaged from some abandoned homestead. They spoke often, their conversations growing deeper as Martha's confidence in her place within the camp strengthened. He told her of Lakota customs, of the sacred ceremonies that marked the turning of seasons, of the growing tensions with white settlers pushing ever westward. She shared stories of her life in Philadelphia, of her journey west with her brother, of the frontier communities with their patchwork of immigrants bringing traditions from across the ocean. What remained unspoken was the current that seemed to flow between them, a connection neither acknowledged but both increasingly felt. Martha told herself it was gratitude on her part, curiosity on his. She was, after all, a novelty, a white woman living willingly among the Lakota, and he was her protector, responsible for her presence in the camp. Nothing more. Until the night. Everything changed. Martha had been in the camp for nearly a month when the war party returned. Their departure 3 days earlier had been swift and purposeful, though no one would tell her where they had gone or why. Running Hawk among them, they had ridden out before dawn, 18 warriors armed with rifles as well as traditional weapons. Their return was heralded by shouts from the sentries posted at the camp's perimeter. Martha emerged from Wichapi's, tippy to see women and children running toward the eastern edge of the camp, their faces alight with relief and anticipation. "What's happening?" she asked a passing woman, one who spoke some English. "Hunter's return," the woman replied, though. Her expression suggested it had been more than a hunting party. Martha followed, keeping a respectful distance as the warriors rode in. They were somber, their faces etched with exhaustion, but there was also pride in their bearing. 3 horses pulled travois laden with goods. Martha could make out crates, barrels, bundles wrapped in canvas. Behind them came 4 additional, horses carrying what appeared to be wounded men, their forms slumped in makeshift stretchers, suspended between paired mounts. Running Hawk rode at the front, his expression grim. Blood stained the sleeve of his buckskin shirt, though he showed no sign of being troubled by whatever injury lurked beneath the fabric. His eyes swept the crowd, pausing briefly when they found Martha. Something flickered in his gaze, relief, perhaps, or reassurance. Then he was moving on, directing the wounded to be taken to the healing lodge, instructing others to begin unloading the travois. Martha hesitated only a moment before following the wounded men. Whatever the war party had been doing, these men needed care, and that was something she could provide without questions or judgment. The healing lodge was already a flurry of activity when she arrived. Wichapi knelt beside one warrior whose chest was wrapped in bloody bandages, while two other women tended to a young man with a severe gash across his thigh. The fourth injured warrior sat against a lodgepole, cradling an arm that was clearly broken. Martha moved to him first, kneeling beside him. "I can help with that," she said, gesturing toward the arm. The warrior eyed her warily, saying something in Lakota that she couldn't fully catch. Before she could respond, Wichapi's voice cut through the tension. "She is a healer. Let her work." The old woman's authority was absolute. The warrior gave a curt nod, extending his injured arm with a grimace of pain. The break was clean, Martha could tell. The bone hadn't pierced the skin, and the alignment wasn't badly off. She had many such fractures over the years. "I need splints," she said, looking around for suitable materials, "and bandages, something for pain." One of the women assisting Wichapi quickly provided what Martha needed: straight sticks of precise length, strips of soft hide, a small bowl of foul-smelling paste that Martha recognized as a numbing agent. Working efficiently, she applied the paste around the break, waiting for the warrior's tense muscles to relax as the medicine took effect. Then with quick, practiced movements, she realigned the bone, ignoring the man's sharp intake of breath, and secured the arm between the splints with firm wraps of the hide strips. "Don't use it for one moon," she instructed, speaking slowly, to ensure he understood. "Keep elevated when sleeping." She demonstrated by propping his arm on a folded buffalo robe. "Change bandages every 2 days. Wichapi will show you." The warrior studied his splintered arm, then looked at Martha with new respect. He said something in Lakota that included "wopila," thank you, a word she had learned early. Martha moved to the next patient, working alongside the Lakota women with the seamless cooperation that comes from shared purpose. For the next 2 hours, they cleaned wounds, stitched gashes, set the broken arm, and treated a bullet graze that had left an angry furrow across one warrior's scalp. It was only when all 4 men had been treated and settled as comfortably as possible that Martha finally stepped outside the healing lodge, her hands and apron stained with blood, her muscles aching from tension and exertion. Night had fallen. Fires blazed throughout the camp, illuminating groups gathered to hear the returning warriors' tales. Martha couldn't make out the words from where she stood, but the animated gestures, the expressions of outrage and satisfaction, told their own story. They raided the trading post at Yellow Creek. Martha startled at Running Hawk's voice beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Why?" she asked, though she suspected she knew. Running Hawk's jaw tightened. "3 days ago, 2 of our young men went there to trade furs. Agent Miller beat one nearly to death, saying he tried to steal. Locked the other in a storage cellar." Martha's heart sank. She had never met Agent Miller, but she had heard stories about the man who ran the Yellow Creek trading post, a hard, cruel overseer who systematically cheated the tribes who came to trade. "What happened?" she asked, though the evidence of wounded warriors and loaded travois told much of the story. "We waited until night, freed our brother, took back what was stolen from us over many moons." His voice was level, matter of fact. "Miller and his men fought. No one died, but—" He gestured toward the healing lodge. Martha understood the restraint that represented. The war party could have killed everyone at the trading post. Many would have argued they were justified. Instead, they had limited themselves to freeing their tribesmen and reclaiming goods they believed had been taken from them through dishonest trading. "Your arm," she said, noticing again the blood on his sleeve. "Let me see it." For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, wordlessly, he extended his arm. Martha pushed up the sleeve to reveal a long, shallow cut that ran from elbow to wrist. "This needs cleaning and stitching," she said. automatically shifting into healer mode. "Come to the healing lodge." Running Hawk shook his head. "Others need to lodge more. Tend me in my tipi." There was nothing inappropriate in the request. Healers regularly went to patients rather than the other way around when circumstances warranted. Still, Martha felt a flicker of uncertainty. She had never been alone with Running Hawk in such an intimate setting. He seemed to sense her hesitation. "Wichapi can come too, if you wish." "No," Martha said quickly, suddenly embarrassed by her own reaction. "Your mother has enough to do. I'll need clean water, bandages, and my sewing kit." Running Hawk's teepee was larger than most in the camp, befitting his status as a council member and respected warrior. It was sparsely furnished, but meticulously organized. Weapons arranged on a rack, robes folded neatly, cooking implements hanging from lodge poles. A central fire pit provided both warmth and light, the smoke rising through the open flap at the tipi's peak. Martha directed him to sit where the firelight was strongest, then knelt beside him, laying out her supplies. The domestic intimacy of the scene struck her forcibly. How many times had she tended her brother's injuries in just this way, yet this felt different, charged with an awareness that had nothing to do with healing. "Remove shirt," she instructed, keeping her voice professionally. "Brisk, I need to see if there are other injuries." Running Hawk complied, tugging the blood-stained buckskin over his head with a barely perceptible wince. Martha forced herself to focus on assessing his condition, not on the bronzed expanse of his chest and shoulders, marked with the scars of a warrior's life. Besides the arm wound, he had bruising along his ribs and a small cut above one eyebrow, but nothing that required immediate attention. She cleaned the arm wound thoroughly, pleased to find it was even less serious than she had initially feared. "This won't need stitching after all," she told him. "The cut is clean and shallow. Bandaging should be sufficient." Running Hawk watched as she applied a healing salve of her own making, a mixture of Wichapi's herbs with ingredients she had brought from her own stores. His gaze was intense, assessing. "You are not afraid," he said suddenly. Martha's hands paused in their work. "Of what?" "Of what we did. Of warriors who fight." Martha considered her answer carefully. "I'm a healer. I see the wounds, not the battle, that caused them." She resumed bandaging his arm. "And no, I'm not afraid of you or your warriors. Should I be?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meanings. Some whites fear all Indians, see monsters in red skin. Some Indians see monsters in all whites, Martha countered gently. "Both are wrong." Running Hawk's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You have a sharp mind." "I'm told that's common among the old," Martha replied, allowing a touch of dry humor into her voice. This time, Running Hawk did smile, the expression transforming his stern features. "Old trees have deep roots. Stands when young ones fall." The metaphor pleased her. "Is that a Lakota saying?" "No, just the truth." Martha finished securing the bandage, her task complete. She should leave now, return to the teepee she shared with two other unmarried women. Yet she found herself lingering, reluctant to break the strange intimacy of the moment. "Thank you," Running Hawk said, "for helping my men." "It's what I'm here for," Martha replied, "to repay your people's kindness." Running Hawk shook his head slightly. "No debt between us, no payment needed." His gaze held hers, and Martha felt a sudden certainty that they were no longer speaking solely of healing services or tribal hospitality. There was something more here, something neither had names for. "I should go," she said softly. "Wichapi may need help with the others." Running Hawk nodded, but as Martha gathered her supplies and rose to leave, he caught her hand. The contact was brief, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Sleep well, Martha Blackwood." It was the first time he had used her full name. "And you, Running Hawk," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Outside, the night air cooled. her flushed cheeks as Martha made her way back to the healing lodge. Whatever had just passed between them, whatever might be growing in the space where two worlds met, would have to wait. Tonight, there were wounds to tend and warriors to heal. Yet as she worked alongside Wichapi into the night, Martha found her thoughts returning again and again to Running Hawk's teepee, to the moment when something unspoken had been acknowledged between them. The days following the raid brought increased vigilance to the camp. Scouts were posted farther afield. Children kept closer to the center of the village. Hunting parties doubled in size for protection. Everyone knew there would be repercussions once word of the raid reached Fort Laramie. Martha continued her teaching and healing duties, but now there was a new tension underlying daily activities. She felt it in the way some of the camp's women watched her, not with hostility, but with renewed awareness of her whiteness, her difference. She was not one of them, no matter how integrated into their lives she had become. Only with Wichapi did things remain unchanged. The old woman's perspective transcended the immediate concerns of raids and reprisals. She had seen the cycle repeat too many times to be overly alarmed by this latest turn. Men dance their war dances, make big talk, she told Martha, as they sorted through the medicinal stores taken from the trading post. Then time passes, new troubles come, old ones fade. Martha wished she could share Wichapi's philosophical view, but she had lived among white settlers long enough to know how they would respond to what they would see as nothing less than an act of unprovoked Indian aggression. "There will be soldiers," she said quietly. Wichapi nodded, her expression serene. "There are soldiers. They come. We move. Circle continues." The casual acceptance of this pattern, aggression, retreat, temporary peace, renewed aggression, struck Martha as profoundly sad. This was the reality for the Lakota, for all the tribes, caught in the westward expansion of white settlement. What if it could be different? Martha asked, the question emerging from some deep place within her. Wichapi gave her a shrewd look. "You speak of peace between our peoples. Is it impossible?" The old woman was silent for a long moment, her gnarled fingers continuing their methodical sorting of herbs. "Star Nation," she said finally, using the Lakota name for the night sky, "has many stars. Each one is separate, far from others, yet together they make patterns, together they light darkness." She looked directly at Martha. "Different peoples can live separately but in a pattern that brings light. But how?" Martha pressed. "When there's so much hatred, so much history. One heart changes, then another, then another." Wichapi tapped Martha's chest gently. "Yours already has. My son's too. Small beginning, like first spring shoots breaking through snow." Before Martha could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Voices called back and forth across the camp, urgent but not panicked. Both women moved to the teepee entrance. A lone rider approached the camp at a gallop, one of the scouts posted to the south. Even at a distance, Martha could see the tension. In his posture, the urgency in his pace. Warriors assembled quickly, Running Hawk among them, moving to meet the returning scout. A crowd gathered, but at a respectful distance, allowing the leadership to receive whatever news was coming. Martha stayed where she was, watching as the scout dismounted and spoke rapidly to the assembled men. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language, the scout's animated gestures, the stiffening of the warriors' postures, the swift exchange of glances that communicated volumes. After a brief discussion, the group dispersed, warriors moving purposefully toward various tasks. Running Hawk headed directly toward Martha and Wichapi, his expression grim. "Soldiers coming," he confirmed as he reached them. "Small party, 6 men, 1 officer, from Fort Laramie." Martha's stomach tightened. "Because of the raid?" "Yes, but Not a war party. They bring a message, Scout says. Fly white flag, that was something at least. A white flag meant negotiation rather than immediate violence. Wichapi asked a question in Lakota, too rapid for Martha to follow. Running Hawk responded briefly, then turned back to Martha. Council meets now. You come too. Martha blinked in. Surprise. Me, but I'm not. You know white soldiers. Know their ways. His expression softened slightly. Need your wisdom. The request, the acknowledgement of her value beyond her healing skills, touched Martha deeply. Yet it also placed her in a precarious position. She would be straddling two worlds, asked to interpret one to the other. I'll help however I can, she said. The council tipi was already filled with men when Running Hawk led Martha inside. 12 tribal leaders sat in a semicircle, their faces solemn in the dim light. A space had been left for Running Hawk near the center, with a smaller space beside it where Martha was directed to sit. She felt the weight of their gazes, some curious, some suspicious, some unreadable. These men had welcomed her to their camp, but that didn't mean they trusted her completely. How could they, when she shared blood with their oppressors? The eldest of the council members spoke first, his words translated in whispers by Running Hawk. The scout says soldiers bring paper with talking marks. They ask for the one who led the raid on the trading post. Martha understood immediately. The army wanted to hold someone accountable. Specifically, they wanted Running Hawk, who they would have identified as the raid leader. What else? Another council member asked. They say if a leader comes forward, no attack on the village. If not, the old man's expression hardened, they return with more soldiers, the familiar pattern of threat and intimidation used countless times against tribes throughout the West. Martha had seen it before, read about it in newspapers that celebrated each new treaty, each surrender of tribal lands as progress. Running Hawk spoke next, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. I will go. My decision to raid. My responsibility. A heated discussion followed, most of it too rapid for Martha to follow. She gathered that some wanted to break camp immediately and move deeper into Lakota territory, while others argued for standing their ground, perhaps even fighting. Finally, Running Hawk turned to her. What do you think, Martha Blackwood? What would soldiers do if I went to them? All eyes turned to her, waiting. Martha felt the enormous weight of their trust, their vulnerability. These people had saved her life, given her purpose when her own world had cast her out. Now they were asking her to guide them through a danger that her people had created. She took a deep breath, choosing her words with utmost care. If you go alone, they may arrest you, take you to Fort Laramie for trial. She met his gaze directly. White justice is rarely fair to Indians. Running Hawk nodded, unsurprised. And if I do not go, then they will likely return as threatened with more soldiers. There might be violence. Martha looked around the circle of leaders. But there is another possibility. She described a different approach, one that might satisfy white authorities without sacrificing Running Hawk or bringing violence to the village. It was risky, dependent on the character of the officer leading the soldier party, but it offered a middle path where none had seemed to exist. As Martha outlined her plan, she saw something kindling in Running Hawk's eyes. Not quite hope, but perhaps its more cautious cousin. Around the council circle, expressions shifted from skepticism to consideration. For the first time since arriving in the Lakota camp, Martha felt she was giving back something of true value, not just healing or teaching, but a bridge between worlds that just might prevent bloodshed. When she finished speaking, silence fell over the council tipi. After a long moment, the eldest council member spoke again, looking directly at Martha. White women have courage, speaks truth when easy words would please more. He turned to Running Hawk. What say you, her path or yours? Running Hawk studied. Martha for a heartbeat longer, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then he faced the council, and his decision was made. We try her way. If it fails, I will go alone. One by one, the council members signaled their agreement. The decision was made. Tomorrow, they would face the soldiers with the strategy Martha had proposed. As the council dispersed, Running Hawk walked Martha back toward her teepee, both silent under the weight of what had just transpired. When they reached her dwelling, he paused. "Why help us? Your people come with guns, with threats. You could return to them." The question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. Martha considered it carefully. "My people cast me out," she said finally. "Left me to die because I was too old, too burdensome. Your people saved me, gave me purpose, showed me respect." She met his gaze steadily. "I know where my loyalty lies." Running Hawk studied her face as if memorizing its features. Then, with a gesture both foreign and deeply meaningful, he placed his palm over his heart, then extended it toward her, offering something of himself, accepting something of her in return. At that moment, Martha Blackwood understood that whatever happened tomorrow, her life had been irrevocably changed. The woman who had stumbled half-frozen through a Dakota blizzard was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who had found strength not despite her age, but because of it, wisdom not despite her trials, but through them. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had found something else as well, something unexpected and precious that transcended the boundaries between their worlds. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Lakota camp. Martha had slept little, her mind churning with possibilities, with plans and contingencies, with the weight of the trust placed in her. Now she stood beside Wichapi outside the healing lodge, watching as the camp prepared for the soldiers. Arrival, warriors donned ceremonial paint, not the bold patterns of war, but the more subtle markings of formal negotiation. Women prepared a feast that would serve as both hospitality and statement. We are prosperous, we are organized, we are not desperate. "You wear this," Wichapi said, holding out a dress of soft deerskin, beautifully tanned and decorated with intricate beadwork along the yoke and hem. "My making, for you." Martha touched the garment with reverent fingers. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the beaded designs telling a story she couldn't yet read, but sensed was significant. "Wichapi, I can't accept this. It must have taken months to create." The old woman smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Began when Sun brought you to camp. Finished 3 days ago. New time would come when you stand between worlds. Need to belong to both." The gift struck Martha deeply, not just for its beauty, but for its meaning. This was acceptance, belonging, identity. With trembling hands, she took the dress, overcome with emotion she couldn't fully express. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I will wear it with honor." When Martha emerged from the teepee wearing Wichapi's creation, she felt transformed. The dress fit perfectly, the weight of the beadwork anchoring her to the earth in a way her old tattered garments never had. She had kept her own boots, practical and sturdy, but Wichapi had added beaded decorations that incorporated them into the overall design. A ripple of reaction spread through the women nearby, approving nods, murmurs of appreciation. One young mother approached, gently touching the beadwork at Martha's shoulder. "Good medicine," she said in halting English. "Wichapi, best beadworker. Tell your story." Martha looked down at the designs, seeing them with new eyes. "My story?" The woman traced a pattern with her finger, a lone figure surrounded by swirling shapes. "Winter storm, you alone." Her finger moved to another section where the lone figure was joined by others. "Lakota, find you." Finally, she touched a circular pattern where many beads of different colors formed an intricate whole. "You become part of the circle. Tears pricked Martha's eyes. She had never worn anything so meaningful, so personal. This was no mere garment, it was a declaration. Running Hawk appeared then, mounted on his favorite horse, a powerful buckskin stallion. He too was dressed for the occasion, his hair freshly braided, a magnificent eagle feather hanging from one plait, his buckskin shirt adorned with porcupine quill work that marked him as a man of status. Around his neck hung a medicine pouch and a silver peace medal, a gift from some long-ago treaty delegation that now served as a silent reminder of promises made and broken. He reined in his horse, his gaze taking in Martha's transformation. Something flickered in his expression, pride, perhaps, or appreciation. "Are you ready?" he asked simply. Martha nodded, straightening her shoulders. Yes, the plan they had developed was straightforward, but required perfect timing. Running Hawk would lead a delegation to meet the soldiers at the agreed location, a flat area about half a mile from camp. Martha would remain hidden initially, watching and listening. Only when the situation was clear would she reveal herself, using her position as a white woman to mediate between the two sides. It was crucial that the soldiers not know immediately that she was living willingly among the Lakota. Their first assumption would be that she was a captive, and that perception, however false, might be useful in the negotiations. Martha took her position behind a screen of brush, close enough to hear, but hidden from immediate view. 4 warriors accompanied Running Hawk, each chosen carefully, 2 elder council members whose presence signaled respect for the proceedings, and 2 younger men known for their fluency in English. They didn't have long to wait. By mid-morning, a small dust cloud on the horizon announced the soldiers' approach. 6 mounted cavalry troops, and 1 officer, just as the scout had reported. They rode in tight formation, rifles visible but not aimed, the white flag of truce fluttering from a makeshift pole. Running Hawk and his delegation sat their horses with dignity, making no move toward weapons, presenting a picture of calm authority. Martha could just make out the face of the army officer as he approached, young, perhaps 30, with a carefully trimmed mustache and the rigid posture of a West Point graduate. Not a frontier veteran, then. That could work in their favor. The officer reined in his horse about 20 feet from the Lakota delegation, signaling his men to halt. "I am Lieutenant James Wilson, United States Army, Fort Laramie. I am here under orders to investigate the raid on the Yellow Creek trading post 3 days ago." His voice carried clearly to Martha's hiding place. The young officer was making an effort to sound authoritative, but she could detect the underlying nervousness in his tone. This was likely his first independent command, his first direct negotiation with hostile Indians. Running Hawk inclined, his head slightly. "I am Running Hawk, council member of Hunkpapa, Lakota. We talk in peace." Lieutenant Wilson's posture remained stiff. "I have been authorized to demand the surrender of the war party leader responsible for the attack. If he comes forward willingly, there will be no reprisals against this camp. And if not?" Running Hawk asked, his voice level. Wilson shifted in his saddle. "Then I am to report back to Fort Laramie, and a larger force will be dispatched." It was exactly as Martha had predicted. Now came the crucial moment in their strategy. Running Hawk spoke again, his tone measured. "Raid happened because Agent Miller beat a young man nearly to death, locked another in the cellar 3 days, no water. You know this?" The lieutenant hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the direct accusation. "I have heard some complaints to that effect, but that doesn't justify—" "Agent Miller cheats Lakota for 3 winters, Running Hawk continued. "Gives half measure for furs, trades whiskey against law, steals from the government and Indians both." Martha could see the uncertainty in Wilson's face. He was young enough to still believe in justice, perhaps not yet hardened by years of frontier politics and expedient compromises. "These are serious allegations," Wilson said finally, "but they must be investigated through proper channels. Raiding a government trading post is not the answer." "White channels bring no justice to Indians," Running Hawk replied. "But we do not come to argue about the past. We came with an offer." This was where their plan diverged from the army's expectations. Instead of resistance or capitulation, they would propose an alternative that might satisfy both sides. "What offer?" Wilson asked, caution evident in his voice. Running Hawk gestured to one of the younger warriors who rode forward with a bundle. Wrapped in tanned hide, he unwrapped it to reveal several ledger books taken from the trading post. "These show Miller's true dealings," Running Hawk explained. "2 sets of books. One for army inspectors, one real. Show how he cheats the government, cheats Indians." Martha could see the lieutenant's interest piqued, despite his effort to maintain an impassive expression. Corruption among Indian agents was common knowledge, but solid proof was rare. "In exchange for these, you want immunity for the raid," Wilson surmised. "Not just that," Running Hawk said. "Want new agent at Yellow Creek. Want Miller gone." "Lieutenant," Wilson frowned, "I don't have the authority to promise that." "Then take books to one who does," Running Hawk countered. "We keep peace. You bring justice." It was time. Martha took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her beautiful new dress, and stepped from her hiding place. She walked forward with deliberate steps, conscious of the tableau she presented. A white woman in Lakota clothing, moving freely and confidently among the hostile Indians. The reaction among the soldiers was immediate. Rifles raised instinctively before Wilson barked a sharp, "Stand down!" His own expression was a mixture of shock and confusion as he stared at Martha. "Ma'am," he called uncertainty, Are you being held against your will?" Martha stopped, beside Running Hawk's horse, looking up at the young lieutenant with calm assurance. "No, Lieutenant Wilson, I am here by choice. My name is Martha Blackwood, formerly of the Blackwood homestead near Bismarck. These people saved my life when I was cast out by my family and left to die in a blizzard." Wilson's confusion deepened. "Cast out? By whom?" "By my nephew, Richard Blackwood. He decided I was too old to be worth the food I consumed." Martha kept her voice even, though the memory still had the power to wound. "The Lakota found me half frozen. They took me in, healed me, and gave me purpose." She gestured to the beaded dress. "As you can see, I have become one of them." The lieutenant was clearly struggling to reconcile this information with his preconceptions. A white woman choosing to live among Indians challenged everything he had been taught to believe. "Mrs. Blackwood," he began. "Miss," Martha corrected gently, "but here I am simply called Teacher Martha or Healer Martha." Wilson nodded, recalibrating. "Miss Blackwood, while your situation is unusual, it doesn't change the fact that a government trading post was raided. Men were injured. Property was destroyed or stolen. Property that was dishonestly acquired," Martha countered. "Lieutenant, I've lived on this frontier for 15 years. I know the relationship between the army, the Indian agents, and the tribes. I've seen honest agents and corrupt ones. Miller is among the worst." She gestured to the ledgers. "Those books will prove it." Wilson studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Martha recognized his dilemma. If he returned to Fort Laramie without a prisoner but with evidence of corruption, he risked being seen as weak or gullible. If he insisted on arrests, he might provoke the very conflict he had been sent to prevent. "You vouch for these people?" he asked finally, "for their account of events?" "I do," Martha said firmly, "and I offer to accompany you back to Fort Laramie to speak with your commanding officer directly. I can explain the circumstances from both perspectives." This was the riskiest part of their plan. Martha voluntarily placed herself in army custody, trusting that her status as a white woman would protect her long enough to make their case. Running Hawk had initially objected strongly, but Martha had insisted. She was the only one who could move between worlds without immediate suspicion. Wilson considered her offer, then nodded slowly. "That would be helpful, but I'll need more than ledger books. I'll need testimony from the injured young men, evidence of Miller's actions." "We can provide that," Martha assured him. "One of the young men is still recovering in our camp. The other can travel. They will come with me, under your protection and mine." For the first time, Wilson's rigid posture relaxed slightly. "This is highly irregular, Miss Blackwood." Martha smiled. "The entire frontier is highly irregular, Lieutenant. Those who survive learn to find solutions beyond regulation manuals." A hint of an answering smile tugged at Wilson's mustache. "Indeed." He straightened in his saddle, making his decision. "Very well. I'll accept the ledgers and your offer to accompany us back to Fort Laramie. We'll depart tomorrow morning." Running Hawk spoke then, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Our people go with protection paper, written by you, no arrest." Wilson hesitated, then nodded. "I can provide a document of safe passage." "Yes." With the basic agreement reached, the details were quickly arranged. Lieutenant Wilson and his men would camp nearby for the night, joining the Lakota for a meal that would formalize their temporary truce. In the morning, Martha would ride to Fort Laramie with the two young Lakota men who had been mistreated by Miller, carrying the damning ledgers and her own testimony. As the soldiers withdrew to establish their camp, Running Hawk turned to Martha, his expression troubled despite the negotiations' success. "Dangerous," he said simply. "Fort full of soldiers who hate Indians. Miller has friends there." "I know," Martha acknowledged, "but it's the only way to resolve this without bloodshed. I'll be safe. They won't harm a white woman, especially one who can speak to the territorial governor if necessary." Running Hawk's gaze held hers, intense and searching. "Why risk yourself for us?" The question cut to the heart of everything that had developed between them over the past months. Martha answered with equal directness. "Because you risked yourselves for me when I had nothing to offer in return. Because I believe in justice. Because—" She paused, gathering courage. "Because I have found something here I never expected. To find again, purpose, belonging." Something shifted in Running Hawk's expression, a softening, an opening. "Come," he said quietly. "We prepare." The rest of the day passed in careful preparation. The two young men who would accompany Martha were briefed extensively, coached on how to present their testimony and what to expect at the fort. Martha herself was given letters of introduction to several influential settlers known to be sympathetic to Indian concerns. A trader, a missionary, even a newspaper editor in Cheyenne. "Many paths to justice," Whichappie explained as she pressed the letters into Martha's hands. "Not all through the army." That evening, the promised feast brought together Lakota and soldiers in an uneasy but peaceful gathering. Martha watched with satisfaction as Lieutenant Wilson, initially stiff and formal, gradually relaxed in the face of genuine Lakota hospitality. He even attempted a few words in the Lakota language, his pronunciation atrocious, but his effort appreciated. As the meal concluded, an unexpected ceremony began. The eldest council member rose, speaking in Lakota while one of the younger warriors translated. "Tonight, we witness something rare. Truth spoken between enemies, path found between danger and safety." The old man gestured toward Martha. "This woman stands between worlds, not Lakota by birth, but Lakota by choice and action. Not young by the count of winters, but young in spirit and courage." Martha felt a flush rise to her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. "Council has decided," the translation continued. "Martha Blackwood is adopted into Hunkpapa Lakota, becomes daughter of tribe, sister of warriors, mother of children who learn from her wisdom." Whichappie stepped forward, carrying a beautifully crafted necklace, a circular pendant of polished shell, suspended on a cord of braided sinew, adorned with small blue beads that matched the decorations on Martha's dress. "This mark of belonging," the translator explained, as Wichapi placed it around Martha's neck, "shows all tribes that she speaks with Lakota voice, walks Lakota path." Lieutenant Wilson watched the ceremony with evident fascination, clearly recognizing that he was witnessing something few white men ever saw. As Martha bowed her head to receive the necklace, tears flowing freely down her cheeks, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere, as if the very air acknowledged that something profound had transpired. Later, as the gathering dispersed and the camp settled for the night, Martha found herself walking alone under a sky ablaze with stars. Her mind was too full for sleep, her heart too brimming with emotions she could scarcely name. "Cannot sleep?" Running Hawk's voice came from the shadows, startling her. "Too much to think about," she admitted as he fell into step beside her. They walked in companionable silence for a time, following a path that led to a small rise overlooking the camp. Below them, fires burned low, the teepees glowing like paper lanterns against the darkness. In the distance, the soldiers' camp was marked by a single lantern. "You leave tomorrow," Running Hawk said finally, "maybe many days before I return." "If I return," Martha acknowledged the risk quietly, "Miller will fight these accusations. It won't be simple." Running Hawk nodded, his profile strong against the star-filled sky. "Nothing of value is simple." The philosophical observation surprised. A laugh from Martha. "Is that Lakota wisdom?" "No, just the truth I learned over many winters." Another comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the night sounds of the prairie, the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of wind through grass, the soft nickering of horses from the camp below. "I have a question," Running Hawk said, eventually, his voice unusually hesitant. "Personal question." Martha turned to face him, curious at this uncharacteristic uncertainty. "You can ask me anything. In your past life, with white family, white people, were you happy?" The question caught her off guard with its directness, its depth. Martha considered it carefully, unwilling to give a facile answer. "There were moments of happiness," she said finally, "when I helped bring a new life into the world, when I eased someone's suffering, when I taught a child to read and saw their eyes light up with understanding." She sighed softly. "But true happiness, the kind that fills you completely? No. I was useful, respected for my skills, but always somehow apart. The spinster aunt, the midwife, the healer, roles, not a person." Running Hawk nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he had suspected. "And here, with Lakota." Martha didn't hesitate. "Here I have found more than happiness. I've found belonging, purpose. I've found—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I've found myself, I think, the person I was always meant to be, freed from the expectations that bound me before. Even though you are white woman among Indians? Different in all ways?" "Not in all ways," Martha said softly. "In the ways that matter most, I've found more similarity than difference. Compassion, courage, wisdom, honor. These things have no color." Running Hawk turned to face her fully, his expression so intent that Martha felt her heart quicken. "I have something to ask before you leave. Something important." Martha nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Running Hawk took both her hands in his, the gesture both gentle and solemn. "When you return from Fort Laramie, if the path is clear, if your heart is certain, would you consider becoming my wife?" The world seemed to still be around them, the very stars holding their breath. Martha stared at him, certain she had misheard, yet knowing she had not. "Your wife," she whispered, "but I'm—" "Teacher." Healer, woman of courage, Running Hawk interrupted. Woman I have grown to respect, to honor, his voice softened, to love. Love. The word hung between them, beautiful and terrifying in its implications. I am 48 years old, Martha said, feeling compelled to state the obvious obstacle. Too old, my own people said, to be worth keeping alive. Running Hawk's grip on her hands tightened. Your people are fools. Age brings wisdom, strength, of spirit beauty that does not fade with seasons. His expression grew solemn. I have lived 47 winters, lost wife I loved, thought heart would never warm again. He released one of her hands to touch the shell pendant that marked her as Lakota by adoption. Until the winter storm brought you to us. Martha felt tears well in her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she had never expected to experience at this stage of her life. Love had seemed a possibility, meant for younger women, not for a spinster aunt, discarded by her family. The tribe, she began. Would they accept such a union? Some yes, some no. Always this way. Running Hawk shrugged slightly. But the council already makes you Lakota. Mother calls you daughter in her heart. Children love their teacher. It was true. Though there were those in camp who still regarded her with suspicion, many had come to accept her, even value her presence. The adoption ceremony had formalized what was already becoming reality. I need time, Martha said finally. Time to complete this mission. Time to be certain. Running Hawk nodded, no disappointment visible in his expression. Wisdom in waiting, certainty in testing. He released her hands gently. When you return, we speak again. They stood together a moment longer, the enormity of what had passed between them settling around them like an invisible cloak. Then, by mutual unspoken agreement, they began walking back toward camp. As they neared the circle of teepees, running, Hawk spoke once more. Whatever you decide, Martha Blackwood, you have a place here, always. The simple promise meant more to Martha than any flowery declaration of love could have. After a lifetime of conditional acceptance, of being valued for what she could provide rather than who she was, the unconditional nature of Running Hawk's offer touched the deepest part of her soul. In her teepee that night, preparing for the journey, ahead, Martha's thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear about the mission to Fort Laramie, determination to secure justice for the young men who had been mistreated. And underneath it all, a current of wonder at the unexpected turn her life had taken. Cast out to die because she was too old, she had instead found a new beginning. Among people her own society characterized as savages, she had discovered profound wisdom, compassion, and respect for age that white society seemed to have forgotten. And most astonishing of all, she had found love. Not the fleeting passion of youth, but something deeper. A connection of spirits forged through shared purpose, mutual respect, and the recognition of a kindred soul. Whatever dangers tomorrow might bring, whatever challenges awaited at Fort Laramie, Martha knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer the same woman who had stumbled half-frozen through a Dakota blizzard. That woman had been broken by rejection, by the cruel dismissal of all she had to offer. This woman, Teacher Martha, Healer Martha, adopted daughter of the Hunkpapa, Lakota, stood tall and straight, her purpose clear, her value unquestioned. For the first time in her life, Martha Blackwood knew exactly who she was and where she belonged, and as sleep finally claimed her, her last conscious thought was of Running Hawk's face in the starlight and the future that might yet be theirs to share. The journey to Fort Laramie took 4 days. Martha rode alongside Lieutenant Wilson at the head of the small procession, the 2 young Lakota men, Swift Deer and Little Wolf, following close behind, their faces impassive despite the obvious discomfort of being surrounded by soldiers. The ledger books remained in Martha's saddlebag, their damning evidence secured against loss or tampering. The lieutenant proved to be more thoughtful than Martha had initially assumed. During their long hours on horseback, he shared stories of his education at West Point, his brief service in the waning days of the Civil War, and his complicated feelings about his current assignment. "I was raised to believe Indians were savages," he admitted on their third day, voice low enough that only Martha could hear. "My uncle was killed at Little Bighorn. When I received orders to Fort Laramie, my family spoke as if I was being sent to certain death." Martha studied his young face, earnest, troubled, caught between duty and dawning awareness. "And now, after meeting the Lakota?" Wilson's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Now I find myself questioning much of what I was taught." He glanced back at Swift Deer and Little Wolf. "Those men are nothing like the bloodthirsty savages from my school books. They're people, just people trying to protect their families, their way of life." "That realization," Martha said quietly, "is both the simplest and the most profound truth of the frontier." Fort Laramie appeared on the afternoon of the fourth day, its flag visible long before the buildings themselves came into view. As they approached, Martha felt Swift Deer and Little Wolf tense behind her. For them, the fort represented danger, oppression, the inexorable advance of a culture intent on erasing theirs. She turned in her saddle, meeting their eyes with a reassuring nod. They had trusted her enough to come this far. She would not let them down now. Lieutenant Wilson led them directly to the commander's office, bypassing the curious stares of soldiers and civilians who stopped to watch the unusual procession. A young officer, a middle-aged white woman in Lakota dress, and two stoic Indian men. Colonel Henry Bradshaw was a career military man, his beard shot through with gray, his uniform immaculate despite the frontier posting. He listened with growing consternation as Wilson presented their case, his bushy eyebrows drawing together as the lieutenant described the ledger books, the beaten young man, the testimony Martha was prepared to give. "This is highly irregular, Lieutenant," Bradshaw said when Wilson had finished, "bringing Indians into the fort without my prior approval, accepting their version of events over a government agent's. And this woman—" His gaze shifted to Martha, assessing. "Who exactly are you, ma'am? And what is your interest in this matter?" Martha met his gaze directly. "My name is Martha Blackwood. Until 4 months ago, I lived with my nephew on a homestead near Bismarck. When my brother died, my nephew decided I was too old to be worth feeding through the winter. He put me out during a blizzard, expecting me to die." She kept her voice matter-of-fact, free from self-pity. "The Lakota found me half-frozen. They took me in, healed me, gave me purpose as a teacher and healer. I've lived among them since, by choice." Bradshaw's expression revealed nothing. "And you expect me to believe that these savages, as you call them, rescued you out of the goodness of their hearts? A white woman?" "I expect you to believe the truth, Colonel," Martha replied calmly. "And I never called them savages. That word has no place in honest discussion." A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Bradshaw's face. "Let's see these ledger books Lieutenant Wilson mentioned." Martha removed the books from her saddlebag, placing them on the colonel's desk. "The top ledger is the official record Miller kept for government inspectors. The bottom is his actual accounting, showing how he systematically cheated both the government and the tribes he was appointed to serve." For the next hour, Colonel Bradshaw pored over the ledgers, asking occasional clarifying questions. His initial skepticism gradually gave way to grim acceptance as the pattern of fraud became undeniable. Double-entry bookkeeping didn't lie. Miller had been skimming government supplies, shorting tribal allotments, and pocketing the difference for years. "This is damning," Bradshaw admitted finally, "but it doesn't justify a raid on a government trading post." "With respect, Colonel," Martha countered, "what recourse did they have? When Swift Deer and Little Wolf went to trade legitimately, one was beaten nearly to death and the other imprisoned without water for 3 days. They had complained through official channels before to no effect." "Let me hear from the young men themselves," Bradshaw said, surprising Martha with his willingness to listen. Swift Deer spoke first, his English halting but clear. He described going to the trading post with prime beaver pelts, being accused of stealing when he questioned the unfair exchange rate Miller offered, then being struck repeatedly with a rifle butt. Little Wolf's account of his imprisonment in the cellar, 3 days without water, only a single piece of hardtack for food, was delivered with quiet dignity that seemed to affect Bradshaw more than any emotional plea could have. By the time they finished, the Colonel's expression had hardened, though whether against them or Miller wasn't immediately clear. "I'll need to question Agent Miller," he said finally. "He's currently in the infirmary, recovering from injuries sustained during the raid. Lieutenant Wilson, please escort Miss Blackwood and these men to the visitors' quarters. They are to be treated as guests of the fort, not prisoners. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Wilson replied, saluting smartly. As they left the commander's office, Martha felt cautiously optimistic. Bradshaw had not dismissed their claims outright, had not ordered the immediate arrest of Swift Deer and Little Wolf. It was the beginning. The visitors' quarters proved to be a small but clean cabin normally reserved for government inspectors or visiting dignitaries. It had 2 rooms, one for Martha, one for the Lakota men, and a common area with a table and chairs. A young corporal was assigned to bring them meals and attend to basic needs. "The Colonel asks that you remain here until he completes his investigation," Lieutenant Wilson explained, "for your own safety as much as anything. Not everyone at the fort will be pleased by these allegations against Miller." Martha understood the unspoken warning. Miller had friends here, people who benefited from his corruption or shared his views of Indians as subhuman. They were safe, for now, but only as long as they remained under the Colonel's protection. 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Martha used the time to document her testimony in writing, creating a detailed account of everything she had witnessed and learned during her time with the Lakota. Swift Deer and Little Wolf, meanwhile, maintained the patient stillness that Martha had come to recognize as a fundamental Lakota trait, the ability to wait without frustration, to exist fully in each moment without anxiety about the next. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Wilson arrived with news. "Colonel Bradshaw wants to see you all immediately." Something in his tone alerted Martha. "What's happened?" Wilson hesitated. "Miller has filed formal charges, not just against the raiders, but against you, Miss Blackwood. He's claiming you're a traitor to your race, that you've been feeding Lakota information to use against the army." Martha felt cold anger rise within her. "That's absurd. I've lived among them for only 4 months. "I know," Wilson said, his expression troubled, "but Miller has influence, and there are those eager to believe the worst of anyone who speaks. And for the Indians, he escorted them back to the commander's office, where they found not just Colonel Bradshaw, but 2 other men as well. One wore the uniform of an Indian agency superintendent, the other the neat suit of a government clerk. Both regarded Martha and the Lakota men with open suspicion. "Miss Blackwood," Bradshaw began formally, "this is Superintendent Carter from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Mr. Reynolds from the Territorial Governor's Office. They've come in response to the serious allegations brought against Agent Miller." Martha noted that Bradshaw said nothing about the counter-allegations Miller had made against her. Perhaps he was reserving judgment. Superintendent Carter spoke first, his tone clipped and dismissive. "We've reviewed your claims, Miss Blackwood. While there appear to be some minor discrepancies in Agent Miller's bookkeeping, we find nothing to support accusations of systematic fraud." Martha stared at him in disbelief. Minor discrepancies. The ledgers show thousands of dollars worth of supplies diverted, rations shorted, annuity payments misappropriated. That's not minor by any standard. Easy enough to fabricate such evidence, Carter replied coolly, especially with the help of disgruntled Indians who resent any authority. Martha felt her temper rise but controlled it with effort. Losing her composure now would only validate their prejudice. The ledgers are in Miller's own handwriting, she pointed out. Any expert can verify that, and they were taken directly from his office during the raid. When precisely do you suggest this fabrication occurred? Reynolds, the governor's clerk, cleared his throat. The issue isn't just the ledgers, Miss Blackwood. It's your unusual situation. A white woman living voluntarily among hostiles, wearing their dress, participating in their ceremonies. It raises questions about your reliability as a witness. The implication was clear. They considered her tainted by association, her testimony worthless compared to a white man's, even one as demonstrably corrupt as Miller. Colonel Bradshaw had remained silent during this exchange, his expression unreadable. Now he spoke, his tone carefully neutral. I've questioned Agent Miller extensively. While he admits to certain irregularities in his management, he insists they were minor and done with the best interests of the government in mind. Martha could scarcely believe what she was hearing. The best interests of the government. He was stealing from both the government and the tribes he was supposed to be serving. Miss Blackwood, Superintendent Carter cut in, you're emotional. Attachment to these Indians is clouding your judgment. Agent Miller has served in his position for 6 years with no previous complaints. No previous complaints? Swift Deer spoke suddenly, his voice sharp with disbelief. Many complaints, many times. No one listens. A tense silence followed his outburst. Reynolds and Carter exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their dismissal of Indian testimony. Martha felt a crushing sense of defeat. This was the justice. She had promised Running Hawk and the council, this farce of an investigation where the outcome had clearly been decided before they ever arrived. Then Colonel Bradshaw surprised her. Gentlemen, with respect, I'm not satisfied that we've gotten to the truth of this matter. He turned to his desk, lifting a sheet of paper. I took the liberty of wiring the Territorial Bank in Cheyenne. Miller has made deposits totaling over $4,000 in the past 2 years. His annual salary is $800. Carter's face flushed. You had no right to— I had every right, Bradshaw interrupted calmly. A crime was alleged to have occurred in my jurisdiction. I investigated, as is my duty. Martha felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Bradshaw was more than just another Army officer willing to overlook corruption for the sake of convenience. Reynolds recovered first. Even if, and I stress if, Agent Miller has been engaged in some financial impropriety, it doesn't justify an armed raid on a government post. The Indians involved must be held accountable, and they will be, Bradshaw agreed, but so will Miller. The next 2 hours passed in tense negotiation. Martha watched as Bradshaw methodically laid out his evidence. Not just the ledgers and bank records, but testimony from other traders who had witnessed Miller's mistreatment of Indians. Reports from Army scouts who had seen the condition of Swift Deer after his beating. Gradually, reluctantly, Carter and Reynolds began to yield ground. By mid-afternoon, a compromise had been reached. Miller would be removed from his position and charged with embezzlement of government funds. In exchange, the Lakota who had participated in the raid would not face criminal charges, though they would be required to return any items taken beyond the incriminating ledgers. It was far from perfect justice, but it was more than Martha had or dared hope for when she saw the open hostility on Carter and Reynolds' faces. As the meeting concluded, Colonel Bradshaw addressed Martha directly. "You'll be free to leave tomorrow, Miss Blackwood. I've arranged an escort to return you and these men to the Lakota camp." "Thank you, Colonel," Martha said sincerely. "You've shown more fairness than I expected." Bradshaw's expression was complex, part weariness, part resignation, part something that might have been regret. "I'm a soldier, Miss Blackwood. I follow orders, but I try to remember that I answer to more than just my commanding officers." He paused. "May I ask, do you intend to remain with the Lakota permanently?" The question caught Martha off guard. She hesitated, thinking of Running Hawk's proposal, of the life she might build among people who valued her wisdom rather than dismissing her for her age. "I do," she said finally. "They've become my family in a way my blood relations never truly were." Bradshaw nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Then I hope, for your sake, that the peace holds, but I wouldn't count on it. The tide of settlement can't be stopped, Miss Blackwood. Not by you, not by me, not by all the army regulars on the frontier." His words chilled her, not because they were cruel, but because she feared they were true. The return journey to the Lakota camp began at dawn the next day. Lieutenant Wilson himself led their escort. 6 soldiers chosen, Martha suspected, for their discipline and lack of prejudice against Indians. They traveled swiftly, all eager to leave Fort Laramie and its uncomfortable compromises behind. On their 3rd day of travel, as they made camp along a nameless creek, Wilson approached Martha as she sat alone by the fire. "Miss Blackwood," he began hesitantly, "may I speak frankly?" Martha nodded, curious about what was troubling the young officer. "I've been thinking about what Colonel Bradshaw said, about the tide of settlement." Wilson sat beside her, his voice low enough that the others wouldn't hear. "He's right, you know. More settlers are coming every day. More forts are being built. More hunting grounds are shrinking." "I know," Martha acknowledged softly. "The Lakota know it too. Then why stay with them? You could return to white society. With your skills as a healer, you could establish yourself in any frontier town." Martha studied the earnest young face beside her. Wilson meant well. He couldn't understand what he was really asking. "Lieutenant, when my nephew cast me out, he did so because in white society, an aging woman with no husband has little value. My skills were appreciated, but not enough to offset the burden of my existence." She touched the shell pendant that marked her as Lakota by adoption. "Among the people you call savages, I found respect, purpose, belonging." Wilson frowned slightly. "But surely there are decent white communities." "Perhaps," Martha conceded. "But I've made my choice, and it's not just about how I'm treated." She paused, wondering how much to reveal. "There are other considerations as well. Something in—" Her tone must have given her away. Wilson's eyes widened slightly. "You've formed an attachment to one of them." "To one of the most honorable men I've ever known," Martha corrected gently. "Yes." The lieutenant fell silent, clearly struggling to reconcile this with his worldview. Finally, he spoke again, his voice soft with genuine concern. "You understand what that means? How do both whites and Indians view such a union?" Martha smiled sadly. "At my age, Lieutenant, one learns which opinions matter and which don't. I've lived half a century trying to meet others' expectations. I intend to spend whatever years remain on my own terms." Wilson nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression despite his obvious reservations. "I wish you happiness then, Miss Blackwood. Truly." "Thank you," Martha replied, touched by his sincerity. "And I wish you wisdom in your dealings with the Lakota. They are not the enemy your training has led you to believe." 2 days later, they created a rise overlooking the Lakota camp. Martha felt her heart lift at the sight of the tipi circle, smoke rising peacefully into the clear spring sky. Home. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she had found home in this unexpected place. As they approached, riders came out to meet them, a welcoming party led by Running Hawk himself. His face remained impassive as they drew near, but Martha could read the relief in his eyes, the subtle easing of tension in his shoulders when he confirmed she was unharmed. The formal greetings were exchanged with careful dignity on both sides. Lieutenant Wilson presented the official document from Colonel Bradshaw, confirming that Miller had been removed and that no charges would be pursued against the participants in the raid, provided all stolen goods beyond the ledgers were returned. Only, when these formalities were complete, did Running Hawk turn to Martha directly. "You are well?" The simple question contained volumes of concern, of things that couldn't be said in front of the soldiers. "I am," Martha assured him. "We accomplished what we set out to do, not perfectly, but enough." A barely perceptible nod acknowledged her success. "Come, council waits to hear the full story." Martha turned to Lieutenant Wilson, extending her hand. "Thank you for your fairness, Lieutenant. It won't be forgotten." Wilson took her hand, holding it a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Godspeed, Miss Blackwood. Perhaps our paths will cross again in more peaceful circumstances." "Perhaps," Martha agreed, though both knew it was unlikely. Their worlds were diverging, the brief intersection of their lives already fading into memory. The soldiers departed, dust rising from their horses' hooves as they disappeared over the ridge. Martha watched them go with complicated emotions. Gratitude for Wilson's unexpected allyship, wariness about what the future might hold, relief at being home among the Lakota once more. Home. The word settled in her heart with quiet certainty. Running. Hawk waited until the soldiers were out of sight before moving his horse closer to Martha's. Now, away from white eyes, his expression softened, the stoic mask of the negotiator giving way to the man beneath. "Was worried," he admitted simply. "Fort Laramie is a dangerous place for friends of Lakota." "It was challenging," Martha acknowledged, "but Colonel Bradshaw proved more honorable than expected, and Lieutenant Wilson became an ally of sorts." Running. Hawk studied her face, reading the fatigue etched there. "Rest first. Council can wait until tomorrow." Martha shook her head. "Better to tell the story once, completely, then put it behind us." He nodded, respecting her decision. As they rode toward camp, Running Hawk spoke again, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Did you think about my question before you left?" The marriage proposal. In the complexity of the Fort Laramie negotiations, it had receded to the back of Martha's mind. Now it rushed forward again, demanding an answer she wasn't sure she had fully formed. "I did," she said carefully, "but we should speak of it privately, after the council." Running Hawk accepted this with characteristic patience. "Tonight, then, after the council fire burns low." The council meeting was exhaustive. Martha, Swift Deer, and Little Wolf recounted every detail of their time at Fort Laramie. The initial skepticism, Colonel Bradshaw's unexpected support, the compromise that had been reached. The council received the news with mixed reactions. Some viewed the outcome as a victory. Others saw it as further evidence that white justice would never truly serve Indian interests. "Miller punished, but not enough," one elder observed. "For the same crimes, an Indian would hang." Martha couldn't disagree. The disparity in how similar offenses were treated depending on the perpetrator's race was stark and undeniable. "It's not complete justice," she acknowledged, "but it's a beginning. Miller is removed. The new agent will know he's being watched carefully. And most importantly, no blood was shed on either side." This last point seemed to carry the most weight with the council. They had seen too many cycles of violence, too many mourning rituals for warriors who never returned. An imperfect peace was still preferable to justified bloodshed. As the council dispersed, night had fallen fully. Wichapi approached, enfolding Martha in a rare embrace. "Glad you returned safely, daughter," she murmured. "Sleep in my teepee tonight?" "Much to tell." Martha hesitated, glancing toward Running Hawk, who stood a short distance away, waiting. Wichapi followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "Ah, my son has questions that need answering." She patted Martha's arm. "Tomorrow is soon. Enough for old woman's stories." With that gentle understanding, she withdrew, leaving Martha to approach Running Hawk alone. Without speaking, he gestured toward the same small rise where they had talked before her departure. By unspoken agreement, they walked there in companionable silence, the night air cool but not unpleasant, stars emerging in a sky still tinged with the last indigo remnants of sunset. When they reached the overlook, Running Hawk spoke first. "You did good things at the fort. Brave thing." "We all did," Martha corrected. "Swift Deer and Little Wolf showed incredible courage, entering a place where they had every reason to expect betrayal." Running Hawk nodded acknowledgement. "True. But you walked between worlds, spoke truth to power." He turned to face her directly. "This is a rare gift, valuable to Lakota in days ahead." Martha understood what he was saying. As white encroachment continued, as pressure on the tribes increased, someone who could navigate both cultures might help find paths through the coming conflicts. "I'll do what I can," she promised, "for as long as I'm here." Running Hawk's gaze intensified. "And how long will that be, Martha Blackwood? Rest of days, or until a better offer comes?" There it was, the question that had hovered between them since her return. Not just about marriage, but about commitment, about where her ultimate loyalty would lie if forced to choose. Martha took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling around her. She had spent her journey back from Fort Laramie reflecting on exactly this question. What did she truly want for her remaining years? Where did she belong? Who had earned her loyalty? The answers, when she finally allowed herself to acknowledge them, were surprisingly simple. "Yes," Martha said, her voice soft but unwavering in the stillness of the evening. "My answer is yes, Running Hawk, I will be your wife." The words hung between them, transforming the air itself. In Running Hawk's face, Martha saw a succession of emotions: surprise that she had answered so directly, relief that her answer was affirmative, and finally a joy so profound it seemed to illuminate him from within. He took her hands in his touch gentle yet sure. "You are certain?" Life is not easy for white women among Lakota. Not easy for a Lakota man with white wife. "I've never been more certain of anything," Martha replied. "At Fort Laramie I realized something important. All my life I've done what was expected of me. Dutiful daughter, supportive sister, useful. And I followed the path others laid out, never questioning if it was truly mine." She squeezed his hands. "This choice, you, the Lakota, this life, it's the first one I've made entirely for myself. And it feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Running Hawk nodded slowly, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Among my people there is saying, when heart speaks clearly, mind should listen." "My heart is speaking very clearly," Martha assured him, "and for once in my life, I'm listening." They stood together in the gathering darkness, the camp spread out below them like a scattering of fireflies, each light representing lives interconnected, a community that had taken Martha in when her own had cast her out. A wave of gratitude washed over her, for the storm that had nearly killed her, for Running Hawk finding her in the snow, for all the circumstances that had led to this moment of perfect clarity. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "Is there a ceremony, customs I should know about?" Running Hawk's expression grew thoughtful. "Traditionally, families give gifts, shows respect, honors new bonds." His eyes held a hint of humor. "My mother already plans. Many months she watches, sees what grows between us. Prepare." Martha laughed softly, not entirely surprised. Wichapi had always seemed to see more than she revealed, especially where her son was concerned. "She's a remarkable woman. I'll be honored to call her mother." "She says the same of you," Running Hawk replied, calls you daughter with old soul. He touched the shell pendant at Martha's throat. Now, we tell the council, set day for ceremony. Begin a new path together. As they walked back toward camp, Martha's mind turned to practical matters. Where will we live? Will we share your teepee or new lodge? Running Hawk said decisively. Symbol of new beginning. Women already prepare hides. Men cut poles yesterday. He glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty crossing his features. Unless you prefer white man's house, with wood walls. The question touched Martha deeply. He was offering to adapt to her customs if she wished it, to build something outside his tradition for her comfort. A teepee will be perfect, she assured him. I've grown to appreciate their wisdom. Warm in winter, cool in summer, movable when necessary. White men's fixed houses seem foolish by comparison. Relief and approval mingled in Running Hawk's smile. Good. Teepee is like marriage, strong yet flexible, bends with wind instead of breaking. The news of their intended marriage spread through the camp like wildfire. By morning, it seemed everyone knew. Reactions were as varied as the people themselves. Many of the women who had come to know Martha as a fellow healer or as their children's. Teacher offered warm congratulations. The children themselves were delighted, especially when they learned that Teacher Martha would remain with them permanently. Others in the camp were more reserved, watching with cautious eyes, withholding judgment. A few, particularly among the young warriors who had lost family to white soldiers, made their disapproval plain, with cold shoulders and averted gazes. Wichapi, as Running Hawk had predicted, was already deep in preparation mode. When Martha visited her the morning after accepting Running Hawk's proposal, she found the old woman sorting through her prized possessions, setting aside special items. These are for a new lodge, she explained, holding up beautifully tanned hides decorated with painted symbols. Strong medicine, protect a new beginning. Martha was touched by the gesture. Thank you, Mother. I'll treasure them. Wichapi looked pleased at the form of address. Good you call me this now, makes the old heart happy. She paused in her sorting. Many whispers in camp, some good, some not. You prepared for this? I expected it, Martha admitted. Marriages between different bands might raise eyebrows. A marriage between different worlds is bound to create even more talk. Wichapi nodded approvingly. Wise outlook. Remember this when words sting. Over the next 2 weeks, preparations for the marriage ceremony accelerated. Tradition dictated that the groom's family provide gifts to honor the bride's family. But since Martha had no blood relations present, the gifts were instead distributed among the entire camp, a symbolic acknowledgement that the community as a whole had adopted her. Running Hawk approached the task with solemn commitment. 6 of his finest horses were designated as gifts, special items acquired through years of trading. Blankets, metal cooking pots, beads, lengths of cloth were added to the distribution. Through it all, Martha watched with growing appreciation for the depth of Lakota marriage traditions. This wasn't just a union of 2 people, but a reaffirmation of community bonds, a celebration of abundance shared rather than hoarded. For her part, Martha contributed what she could. Her medical supplies, carefully rationed over her months in the camp, were formally gifted to Wichapi to share with other healers. The books Lieutenant Wilson had provided for her teaching were designated for the children's continued education. She spent long hours creating special medicines, salves, tinctures, poultices, to be distributed on the marriage day. It was Little Crow, one of Martha's young students, who asked the question others had perhaps wondered but not voiced. Teacher Martha, the 10-year-old girl said during a lesson, when you marry Running Hawk, will you have babies like my mother? A hush fell over the teaching teepee as the other children looked up from their work, equally curious. Martha felt, her face warm but answered with honesty, no, Little Crow. I'm too old to have babies. Women's bodies have a season for that, and mine has passed." The girl frowned slightly. "But why marry if no babies come?" It was a logical question from a child, raised in a culture where continuing the family line was of paramount importance. Martha considered her answer carefully, aware that her response would shape these children's understanding of relationships beyond procreation. "People marry for many reasons," she explained. "To share joys and burdens, to support each other through hard times, to build a life together." She smiled gently. "Children are a wonderful blessing, but they're not the only reason to form a family." Little Crow nodded slowly, processing this. "Like my grandmother living with us after grandfather. Walk to spirit world. She helps, teaches, and makes the family stronger." "Exactly," Martha confirmed, pleased by the child's understanding. "Value comes in many forms." That evening she recounted the conversation to Running Hawk as they sat by the fire outside his teepee, working on final preparations for their new lodge. He listened thoughtfully, his hands never ceasing their meticulous crafting of a new pipe rack. "Child asks what others think," he said when she finished. "Some wonder why I choose women beyond childbearing years." Martha had known this would be a concern, though Running Hawk himself had never raised it. "And what do you tell them?" Running Hawk set his work aside, meeting her eyes directly. "I told them I had a wife who gave me a son. Both died before birth, had family once, lost to soldiers' guns." His voice remained steady, though Martha could see the old pain in his eyes. "Tell them now I choose a companion for winter of life. Choose wisdom, strength, courage. Choose a woman who walks between worlds with an open heart." The simple eloquence of his explanation moved Martha deeply. "And that's enough for them?" "For some, yes. For others, time will show wisdom of choice." Running Hawk took her hand. "But it only needs to be enough for us." 3 days before the planned ceremony, an unexpected visitor arrived at the camp. Lieutenant Wilson, now without military escort, rode in under a flag of truce. He was received cautiously but without hostility, everyone mindful of the role he had played in the resolution at Fort Laramie. "Miss Blackwood," he said when Martha was summoned, "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. I was on patrol nearby and wanted to ensure you were well." They spoke privately near the edge of camp, Running Hawk keeping a respectful distance, but remaining within sight. "The truth, Lieutenant," Martha said with gentle directness. "What brings you here? It can't be merely concerned for my welfare." Wilson sighed, his youthful face suddenly weary. "You're right, of course. I came because there are rumors, reports of a white woman living permanently among the Lakota, even plans to marry one of their warriors." He hesitated. "The Indian Agency is concerned. They're talking about sending representatives to rescue you, whether you wish it or not." A chill ran through Martha. "On what authority would they dare? They're claiming you might be held against your will, or that you've been compromised in some way." Wilson's discomfort was evident. "It's nonsense, of course, but they're using it as an excuse." "To do what, precisely?" Martha pressed. "To establish a presence in this camp, to begin the process of forcing the Lakota onto the reservation at Standing Rock." Wilson's voice dropped lower. "There's a new policy coming from Washington. All hostiles are to be contained on designated reservations by year's end. Those who resist will be considered enemies of the state." The news, though not entirely unexpected, hit Martha like a physical blow. This was what Colonel Bradshaw had warned about, the inexorable tide that could not be stopped. "When?" she asked. "The agency representatives could arrive within the month. The broader policy is already being implemented elsewhere." Wilson glanced toward Running Hawk. "I thought you should know. All of you should know so you can prepare." Martha understood what he wasn't saying directly. He was giving them time to decide whether to resist, comply, or disappear into more remote territories. "Thank you. she said with genuine gratitude. "This warning may save lives." Wilson nodded, clearly uncomfortable with his role as informant, but committed to it nonetheless. "There's something else. Your nephew, Richard Blackwood, has filed a legal claim regarding your brother's property. Since you're allegedly deceased, he's petitioning for formal title to the land and all assets." Martha felt a spark of anger. Not content with casting her out to die, Richard was now ensuring that any legal claim she might have had was permanently erased. "Let him have it," she said finally. "That life is behind me now." Wilson studied her face. "The rumor about your marriage, it's true, isn't it?" "Yes," Martha confirmed, lifting her chin slightly. "Running Hawk and I will be joining in 3 days' time." The lieutenant was silent for a long moment. "I won't pretend to understand it, Miss Blackwood, but I've come to respect your judgment too much to question your choice." He glanced again toward Running Hawk. "He's a fortunate man." "We're both fortunate," Martha corrected gently. "Now, will you stay and share a meal before you ride out?" "You'd be welcome." Wilson shook his head regretfully. "Best I don't. If anyone learned I'd warned you." He left the consequences unspoken. "Just be careful, Miss Blackwood. The world is changing quickly out here, and not all the changes are for the better." After Wilson's departure, an emergency council meeting was called. Martha translated his warnings about the Indian Agency's plans, the new policy from Washington, the accelerating push to confine all tribes to reservations. The news was received with grim resignation rather than surprise. The Lakota had seen this pattern before: promises made, then broken, land guaranteed, then taken, peace offered, then betrayed. "What kind of marriage ceremony?" one of the elders asked. "Should I wait for a safer time?" Martha looked to Running Hawk, leaving the decision to him. This affected all the Lakota, not just the two of them. Running Hawk stood, addressing the council with quiet authority. "We do not live in fear. Ceremony continues as planned. Then we decide the next path together, as family, as tribe, as people." He met the eyes of those assembled. "But we decide. Not an Indian agent, not Washington." The council murmured approval. Whatever came next, they would face it on their own terms, maintaining the dignity of their traditions, even as outside forces threatened to dismantle their way of life. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, an early spring sun warming the land still patched with remnants of winter snow. Martha rose before dawn, joining Wichapi and several other women for the ritual preparations. She was bathed in water infused with sacred herbs, her hair combed and arranged in the style of a Lakota wife, 2 braids interwoven with strips of red cloth. Instead of the white wedding dress of her own culture, she wore a specially made outfit of soft buckskin, elaborately decorated with quillwork and beading, that told the story of her journey from abandoned outsider to beloved member of the community. "Beautiful," Wichapi pronounced when the preparations were complete. "Not just clothes, spirit shines." Martha felt beautiful in a way she never had before. At 48, in white society, she would have been considered long past her prime. Useful, perhaps, but certainly not desirable. Definitely not bridal. Here the lines on her face were seen as marks of wisdom, the silver strands in her hair symbols of experience earned. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it more profoundly than she ever had before. The ceremony itself was a blend of traditions. Running Hawk had incorporated elements of both Lakota and white customs, creating something unique that honored both their backgrounds. They exchanged vows beneath an arch of willow branches, Martha speaking in her halting Lakota, Running Hawk responding in his improving English. Prayers were offered to Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, and Martha silently added her own to the god of her childhood. The camp's holy man blessed them with smoke from sacred herbs, while Wichapi wrapped a special blanket around their shoulders, binding them symbolically together. Gifts were distributed to all present, not just the traditional offerings from Running Hawk's family, but Martha's contributions as well. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Martha looked around at the community that had become her own. Children danced to the rhythm of drums, their faces alight with joy. Women laid out food for the feast, their movements practiced and efficient. Men shared stories and songs, their voices rising and falling in patterns as old as the hills themselves. This was what Richard had been incapable of seeing, the richness of a society that valued each member for their unique contributions. Age wasn't a burden here, but an achievement, a status earned through surviving life's challenges and accumulating wisdom to share. Running Hawk approached, now formally her husband, his face more open with happiness than she had ever seen it. "Wife," he said, testing the word as if savoring its taste. "Husband," Martha replied, equally amazed at how right it felt. He took her hands, drawing her slightly away from the celebration's center. "New lodge ready, our home." Pride and tenderness mingled in his voice. "Built with many hands, strong medicine." Martha had seen the construction progressing but had been ceremonially barred from entering until now. Following tradition, Running Hawk led her to the new tipai, beautifully painted with symbols of both healing and protection. At the entrance, he lifted her in his arms, a gesture borrowed from white customs that made her laugh with surprise, and carried her across the threshold. Inside, the lodge was a perfect blend of their worlds. Traditional Lakota furnishings, buffalo, robes, beautifully woven mats, storage parfleches were arranged alongside the few treasured items Martha had managed to retain from her former life. A special place had been created for her healing supplies, another for her teaching materials. In the center, the fire pit was prepared, but not yet lit. Running Hawk set her gently on her feet. "First fire we light together. Begin a new home." Together they kindled the flames that would make the teepee truly theirs, each adding elements with symbolic meaning. Martha, a sprig of sage for wisdom and healing, Running Hawk, a bit of sweetgrass for blessing and protection. As the fire caught and grew, golden light filled the lodge, casting their shadows against the walls, two figures now joined as one. Outside, the celebration continued and would continue until dawn. But here, in the privacy of their new home, Martha and Running Hawk shared a moment of quiet communion. "Are you happy, Martha Blackwood?" he asked, using her full name as he had since their first significant conversation. Martha considered the question seriously. Happiness seemed too small. A word for what she felt, this profound sense of rightness, of belonging, of purpose found. "I am more than happy," she said finally. "I am home." Running Hawk nodded, understanding. "And tomorrow, when challenges come?" He was referring to Wilson's warning, to the uncertain future facing the Lakota, to the difficulties they would inevitably encounter as a mixed couple in a world increasingly hostile to such unions. Martha took his hand, her grip firm and sure. "Tomorrow we face each other, whatever comes." The celebration continued until the stars faded and dawn brushed the eastern horizon with pale fingers of light. Martha and Running Hawk rejoined their community for the final blessing, standing together. As the holy man offered prayers for their future, as the new day fully emerged, Martha looked toward the distant horizon. Somewhere out there, the forces Wilson had warned about were already in motion. Indian agents with their undermining policies, soldiers with their orders, settlers with their insatiable hunger for land. The challenges ahead were real and formidable. Yet, in this moment, surrounded by her new family, her hand firmly clasped in her husband's, Martha Blackwood felt no fear. Whatever the future held, she would meet it as she stood now, with dignity, with purpose, with the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The woman who had been cast out to die because she was too old had found not just survival, but rebirth among people who recognized her true value. Age, which had been her condemnation in white society, was her strength among the Lakota. Experience, which had been dismissed as irrelevance, was honored here as wisdom. And love, which she had thought forever beyond her reach, had found her in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person, at the most unexpected time in her life. Martha squeezed Running Hawk's hand, feeling his answering pressure. Together they would write the next chapter of a story neither could have imagined, a white woman and a Lakota warrior, united against all odds, facing an uncertain future, with the strength that comes from finding one's true place in the world. Not an ending, Martha thought as they walked back to their new lodge, the morning sun warming their faces. A beginning. In the years that followed, Martha and Running Hawk's union became legendary across the Dakota Territory. Their story reached ears far beyond the frontier, eventually finding its way into newspapers back east, where it was received, with a mixture of fascination, disbelief, and occasional outrage. For some, Martha became a cautionary tale. The white squaw, a woman who had gone native after being rejected by civilized society. For others, particularly women of a certain age, she represented something more radical, a pioneer of personal freedom who had dared to choose her own path when conventional options were denied to her. The Lakota themselves told a different story. In their oral tradition, Martha became Wikapiluta, Red Star, a healer who bridged two worlds, whose wisdom and courage helped her adopted people navigate the increasingly treacherous waters of white expansion. As Lieutenant Wilson had warned, the push to confine all tribes to reservations intensified. Running Hawk's band, with Martha's counsel, made strategic choices, sometimes engaging in negotiations, sometimes slipping away to more remote territories, always preserving their essential traditions while adapting to changing realities. Martha never saw her nephew Richard again, though she heard he prospered briefly before losing the homestead to debt and drink. The irony wasn't lost on her, that the young man who had cast her out for being a burden had ultimately proved less resilient than the aging aunt he had condemned to die. For 12 years, Martha and Running Hawk shared a life that defied all expectations. Their lodge became a place of healing and teaching, where Lakota children learned to navigate the white man's world without losing their identity, and where occasional white travelers found care and wisdom that challenged their preconceptions. When Martha finally walked onto the spirit world in the harsh winter of 1879, at the age of 60, she was mourned not as an outsider but as a beloved elder. Running Hawk, his hair now more silver than black, conducted the traditional ceremonies with quiet dignity, honoring her journey from abandoned outcast to respected grandmother of the tribe. Her story might have been forgotten, might have faded into the complex tapestry of frontier mythology, except for one thing: she had taught the Lakota children well. They learned not just English and arithmetic, but the power of preserving their truths through the white man's written words. One of those children, grown to adulthood, eventually recorded the tale of the woman who was left to die for being too old-eaten until a Lakota warrior married her and showed the world that age was not a burden to be discarded, but a treasure to be honored. That record survived the reservations, survived the crushing of the ghost dance, and survived Wounded Knee. It was passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the darkest times, human connection can transcend the boundaries others try to impose, and somewhere in the rolling hills of what was once Dakota territory, the spirits of Martha and Running Hawk are said to walk still, between worlds, between cultures, but always, always together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.